The show was in Indianapolis. It was April 8th, 1994, a Friday, and Bob Dylan had a concert that evening at the Market Square Arena. The tour had been running since January. 43 shows in, 11 to go. The kind of schedule that creates its own gravity. You don't decide each morning to continue. You simply continue because stopping requires more force than moving does. His road manager, a man named Dennis Carver, who had been with Dylan through 3 different decades and knew better than most when to speak and when not to, received the news in the early afternoon. He held it for 20 minutes. Then he knocked on Dylan's dressing room door. The dressing room at Market Square Arena was functional. A mirror, a couch, a small table with a writer that nobody had fully attended to. The kind of room that exists in identical form in arenas across the country. The same dimensions, the same quality of light, the same distant sound of crew work filtering through the walls. Dylan had spent enough of his life in rooms like this that he no longer noticed them particularly. They were just the space between the outside and the stage. Dylan was sitting with a guitar in his lap, not playing it, just holding it the way some people hold things when they are thinking. He looked up when Carver came in. Carver told him. Dylan was quiet for a moment. He looked back down at the guitar. "What time is sound check?" he said. Carver told him that too. Dylan nodded. That was the whole conversation. The show that night ran 2 hours and 4 minutes. Dylan played 23 songs. The set list was not unusual. A mix of older material and songs from the current cycle. The kind of program that a crowd of that size expected and received without surprise. The reviews the following day described the performance as solid, consistent, professional. Nobody in the audience knew what had happened that afternoon. The Market Square Arena held just under 17,000 people that Friday. They had come for the music, and the music was there, and it was good, and they went home afterward talking about the specific songs they had wanted to hear and whether they had heard them. Nobody on stage said anything about it. The tour continued. In the weeks that followed, as Kurt Cobain's death moved through the culture in the particular way that young deaths do, loudly at first, then in longer and longer waves, Dylan's name came up occasionally in the coverage. The two had crossed paths at the Grammy after-party in February of 1993. There had been a brief exchange that people who were present described in different ways, none of them especially illuminating. Dylan had not commented publicly on Cobain's music during the years Nirvana was active. He had not commented now. This was consistent with how Dylan operated. He did not release statements. He did not attend public memorials for people he had not been close to. He moved through the world on his own terms and had done so for long enough that nobody expected anything different. Still, the question existed, unasked and unanswered, in the space between what he had done and what some people felt he might have done. He had not gone to Seattle. He had not sent a public message. He had played Indianapolis. There is a version of this that requires no explanation. Two artists who occupied different worlds, different generations, different understandings of what music was for. One of them died. The other had a show. These things happen. The machinery of a major tour does not stop easily, and nobody is obligated to grieve publicly for someone they did not know well. Dylan knew this version. He lived inside it without apparent difficulty. But there is a thing that happens sometimes in the long middle section of a life, when a decision you made quickly and practically begins to acquire weight it didn't have at the moment you made it. Not guilt exactly, something slower than guilt. The kind of thing that doesn't arrive all at once but accumulates, the way sediment accumulates, invisibly, continuously, until one day you notice the shape of the floor has changed. Dylan continued touring through April and into May. He gave no interviews about Kurt Cobain. He gave no interviews about much of anything, which was not unusual. He wrote songs as he always did. He played shows as he always did. He moved. In 1995, a journalist asked him obliquely, not about Cobain specifically, but about the idea of loss in music, about what it meant when a voice disappeared before it had finished what it was saying. It was the kind of question that offers a door without naming what's behind it. Dylan answered carefully, in the way he answered things that touched on something real. He talked about the tradition of loss in American music, about the blues, about the way certain absences became presences over time. It was a good answer. It was a true answer. The journalist wrote it down and used it, and it read well in print. It was not the whole answer. The years pass the way years pass when a person is working, full and forward-moving, and never quite still enough to examine the things that have settled at the bottom. Dylan put out records. He toured almost constantly the way he had been touring since 1988, what would eventually be called the Never-Ending Tour, though he disliked that name. He played small venues and large ones. He played Europe and America and places between. He played through summers and winters, through the deaths of other people he had known, through anniversaries and retrospectives, and the slow accumulation of everything that a life in music produces when it runs long enough. He kept moving. Kurt Cobain remained where he was. The radio program was called Themes and Variations, a weekly interview format broadcast out of a public radio station in Chicago. Dylan had agreed to appear because someone on his team had arranged it during a period when he was doing more press than usual. 2007, the year of modern times, and a particular moment of critical reevaluation that his team wanted to support. The host was a man named Gerald Foss, who had been doing the program for 19 years and had the particular quality of long-form interviewers who know that the best questions are the ones that arrive late after the subject has relaxed into the conversation and begun to believe they know which direction it is going. Foss had prepared carefully. He had read everything available about Dylan's recent work, about the critical reception, about the trajectory of the Never-Ending Tour. He had also, quietly and without mentioning it to anyone, gone back and read everything available about 1994. Not to ambush, that wasn't his method, but because he believed that the true shape of a person's present was only visible if you understood what they had carried to get there. The interview ran for 90 minutes. It covered the new record, the Nobel Prize speculation that was already beginning to circulate in certain quarters, the question of Dylan's relationship to his own catalog, the nature of influence, the mechanics of songwriting, the difference between performing and performing. Foss was good. Dylan was engaged in the way he was engaged when the conversation was moving at the right speed. With about 15 minutes remaining, Foss shifted. "I want to ask you about 1994, he said. Dylan's expression did not change visibly. He had been asked about 1994 before, about the record he'd made, about the tour, about various things that had happened in that year. "Kurt Cobain died in April of that year," Foss said. "You were on tour. You didn't go to the funeral. You didn't make a public statement. I'm not asking you to defend that. I'm asking if you think about it." The room went quiet in a particular way. Foss later said that in 19 years of interviewing people, he had learned to recognize two kinds of silence. There was the silence of someone deciding what to say, and there was the silence of someone who already knew what to say and was deciding whether to say it. This was the second kind. Dylan looked at the surface of the table between them for a moment. "I think about it," he said. Foss waited. "I was in Indianapolis," Dylan said. "I had a show. I played it. That was the right thing to do at the time. I still think it was the right thing to do at the time." He paused. "But right isn't the same as enough," he said. "I've been confusing those two things for a long time." Foss waited again, very still. "He was doing something I didn't understand yet," Dylan said. "I thought I did. I'd heard the records. I had opinions about them. But understanding and having opinions aren't the same thing either. I had a lot of opinions in 1994. I was short on understanding." He stopped, looked up. "I should have gone," he said. "Not for him. He was past caring. For myself. Because the thing you don't do, the thing you decide isn't necessary. That's the thing that stays. Everything else moves. That one doesn't." Foss did not push further. He understood, in the way experienced interviewers understand, that what had just happened was complete. Anything more would diminish it. He moved the conversation gently toward the new record. Dylan followed. The rest of the interview was good, professional, the kind of thing that gets replayed in full on a slow Sunday afternoon when the station is running archival material. But the part people remembered, the part that circulated, that got written about, that people sent to each other for years afterward, was those four exchanges. The question, the silence, the answer. Right isn't the same as enough. I should have gone. The thing you don't do, that's the thing that stays. There is a particular weight to the things we decide are not necessary. Dylan had made a practical decision on April 8, 1994. He had a show. He played it. The tour continued. These were facts, and they were defensible, and he had lived inside their defense for 13 years without visible difficulty. But somewhere in those 13 years, the defense had become something else. Not a wall. More like a room he kept returning to. Not deliberately, not consciously, the way you don't deliberately return to a bruise, but find your hand there anyway. A room where the question sat in a chair and didn't ask anything. Just waited. Because it knew that eventually the person who built the room would have to come in and sit down, and finally, without anyone forcing them, say the true thing. The true thing was not that he had been wrong to play Indianapolis. He still believed in 2007 that playing Indianapolis was the right decision. The machinery had to keep moving. He was the machinery. That was simply true. The true thing was that right decisions can leave the wrong residue, that efficiency and adequacy are not the same as presence, that there are people, not many, but a specific few, whose disappearance changes the shape of a room you didn't know you were both standing in, and when that happens, the practical response is the one that looks correct from the outside and feels insufficient from the inside, forever. The broadcast aired on a Thursday evening. By the following Monday, the clip had been written about in 3 music publications and quoted in 7 more. Not the whole interview, just those 4 exchanges. The question, the silence, the answer. The specific gravity of a man in his mid-60s saying, in public, without preparation, the thing he had been carrying for 13 years. Most of the responses were the same. People recognized something in the words. Not because they had been to funerals they skipped, though some had, but because everyone knows the particular texture of the decision that seemed reasonable at the time and never fully resolved afterward. Everyone has a version of Indianapolis, a show they played when they should have been somewhere else, a right thing that wasn't enough, a room they built around a decision and then kept finding themselves back inside of, without meaning to, years later. Dylan had put language around it, which was, in the end, what he did. That was the thing he had always done. He found the words for the true shape of something and left them there, without decoration, and let them do their work. The words did their work. He did not speak about Kurt Cobain publicly again after that interview. He didn't need to. The account was complete. The thing that had needed saying had been said, in the right room, at the right speed, to someone who knew how to receive it without turning it into something larger than it was. The 13 years had produced 3 sentences. The 3 sentences had produced something that 300 sentences would not have. That was the architecture, maybe. Not the long song. Not the accumulated image and layered metaphor, built over many verses until the subject was fully surrounded and named. Just the compression, the thing reduced to its smallest true form and left there, without explanation, without defense, taking up exactly the space it needed and no more. Kurt Cobain had known that all along. Dylan had taken longer. The Market Square Arena in Indianapolis was demolished in 2001. The building came down in a controlled implosion, the kind where engineers spend weeks calculating exactly where to place the charges so that the structure falls in precisely the right direction into precisely the space prepared for it. People came to watch. They stood outside the safety perimeter in the early morning and filmed it on cameras and phones. Clean, deliberate. The whole thing took 11 seconds. A building that had stood for 27 years, gone in the time it takes to say a sentence. The show on April 8, 1994, left no physical trace. What remained was the decision and the weight of the decision, and eventually, 13 years later, in a radio station in Chicago, in a conversation that nobody had planned to go in that direction, the words that finally matched the weight. The thing you don't do, that's the thing that stays. Everything else had moved. That one hadn't.